Okay, so it looks like we're going on to another part of the video. So as I've said, scholars have seen that there's this tradition of Yahweh prior to the biblical tradition, that he was worshipped as Yahweh in Edom, in that area where Edom is. And so the God that the Israel-only people are trying to limit to a racially distinct one was himself a Gentile God, okay? So it says he came with 10,000s of saints. From his right hand came a fiery law for them. Yes, he loves his people, all his saints in your hand. They sit down at your feet. Everyone receives your words. Verse 4, Moses commanded a law for us. And then get this, a heritage of the congregation of Jacob. As Don Preston likes to say, and I need a Marco Rubio break, catch the power of that, a heritage of the congregation of Jacob. What's the Hebrew word in verse 4 for congregation? The Hebrew word, the form of it here is kahelot, which is from the word Qahal, all right? Word means assembly, congregation, all right? That gets translated into the Greek Septuagint and gets carried over into the New Testament writings, Second Temple writings. Gets translated into Greek as ecclesia. What does ecclesia get translated into English? You got it, church. Okay, so it's saying Moses commanded a law for us, a heritage of the church of Jacob. Okay, so Jacob was a nation, but it was also a religious congregation, and that's where the New Testament gets this church, gets this idea, this the church of Israel, the church of Jacob, the church of Jesus Christ. Does Jason DeCosta know that there was a church in the Old Covenant? Evidently not. And where am I going with this? Well, okay, I'm sure he probably knows, because there's a verse in Acts 7 where Stephen's talking about the congregation, the children, the assembly that was in the wilderness, and it uses ecclesia. I'm sure he knows that. I hope he does. This verse is stating simply that Moses delivered a law to, and we're going to use how the New Testament writers understood that word. We can translate it into English. We can say, so this verse, stating simply that Moses delivered a law to the church of Jacob as a heritage for them, okay? Now, before we evaluate the racially exclusive implications put forth by DeCosta, who racially limits salvation in the New Testament only to those with DNA from Abraham, let's look at the word Qahal, or congregation, for a moment, because it's that of which the law is a heritage. Now let's look at the Hebrew word heritage. That is morashach. Morashach means heritage, possession, inheritance, okay? To understand who can lawfully inherit and possess the law of Moses, one needs to understand the Qahal, because it's that very thing, that entity, that can claim possession and inheritance of it. If we determine that the Qahal can be racially mixed, then for DeCosta to limit things like inheritance or salvation by race is way off base. Way off base. If we can determine that, then we can see that though there is limitation, it's just coming to the congregation, the Qahal, as a morashach. It is much more accurate to understand as applying to one's position relative to the Qahal, Ecclesia Church, rather than to Jacob's DNA. All right? If we can show that the Qahal, who receives the morashach, is racially diverse, then the focus of who can come into Israel, who can be saved by the Messiah of Israel, and who can inherit in Israel, is not one relative to DNA. It's relative, it's one's position relative to the Qahal / ecclesia / church. So now we need to look at the Qahal, all right? Because if we drill down into the Qahal, we can see, were they ethnically pure? Were they ethnically diverse? And I know Jason at times has said, well, I know a few people have come in, but, and there's some diversity among the Ioers. I argued this point with one of the other scoundrels, Michael Beerus. He would argue that point and say, well, they were just servants in Israel. They couldn't really have anything. They're not real, true inheritors of anything. So I contend, first of all, I just want to get this out. I contend, this is an important point, that from one covenant to another in the Bible, there is a continuity of the Qahal, ecclesia church. My evidence for that, Acts 7, 37 through 38, where Stephen's giving his sermon. This is the Moses who said to the Israelites, God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brothers. This is the one who was in the Qahal, congregation, ecclesia church in the wilderness with the angel who spoke to him at Mount Sinai and with our fathers. So what Stephen is saying is, this is the one who was in the church in the wilderness, and he was talking and prophesying about the Messiah who would come. And what does the Messiah say? Upon this rock I will build my Qahal ecclesia church. So there's continuity. There is continuity of the Qahal from one, the beginning of the Bible to the end. All right. Another thing we have to keep in mind is type and reality. If we see something we understand, and this is Pauline theology right from the New Testament, that the things in the Old Testament, in the Old Covenant, were types. And they were pointing to the reality that was falling upon the first century apostles and the churches that they were starting. So we have to understand that if we see something, and the reality is always much greater than the type. So when we look at things that are in the Old Testament, you have to reason that this is a type. So the reality that we see in the New Testament is going to have to at least be as good as that, but it's going to be greater. So that's why it's vitally important to see, was the Qahal in the Old Covenant, which was a type of the greater Qahal, was that ethnically diverse? If it was, it's game over for Israel only right there on that point. Because yes, some Gentiles that were coming in were, if you could look at their DNA, which apparently Paul was not interested in, because there's nothing in the New Testament where Paul ever questions anybody's DNA or family tree or background. It's just as, come in, Gentiles. If you're a Gentile, come in. So sure, it was bringing in lost tribes people who had become assimilated over 700 years of living as a pagan. Sure. But there would be also people that they don't know where, who knows who they're descended from. Complete barbarian, whoever. And so you can't make it about race on that point in the New Testament. Stephen is preaching about Moses, who was in the ecclesia in the wilderness. This is a New Testament context. Ecclesia had a defined meaning. And he says that he prophesied of one coming like him whom Israel would listen to. And of course, Jesus comes and says, on this rock I will build my ecclesia. So there's no doubt God always had a Qahal ecclesia church. It's a covenant community. If you want to know what the Qahal was, it's a covenant community. That makes sense. Law is covenant. When you make covenants are made with a covenant community. They're a community in covenant. An assembly in covenant with God. Yes, with national and religious properties, okay? Because obviously they're a nation, all right? But is it racially diverse or monolithic? That's the question. Here's where you have to be careful with the language when trying to describe DeCosta's views, because if I don't use his words just right, he's going to exploit that and he's going to start crying, you're being so dishonest. You're saying that's what I believe. That's not. So now I'm going to troll you. Now I'm going to pile up the ad hominems. So that's how he justifies his trolling. And then he'll claim you deserved it, because you're dishonesty. So to be fair, I have seen Jason admit in some conversations, I'm not like the old Israel only with Rivers and Corey. I believe, yes, that there were some non-Israelites that came in. Okay. But then in other contexts, this omission gets completely lost when he and his followers pejoratively call out Gentile believers in Jesus today as pretending to be Israelites and wannabes. So the weakness of DeCosta's system is that the question of what makes post-80, 70 believers pretenders and wannabes, is it because of race? Well, we just showed it can't be. What's the other alternative? Time, okay? So the question, though, because Jason will say in some context, yes, some non-Israelites came in, but then he'll call you, based on racial considerations, you're a pretender because you're not Israel, wasn't meant for you. To a degree, that's unresolved. I'm going to try to resolve it for him, because he can't say both. That's not good. That's not a righteous way to go about your conversations. So can he say both? Not if I can prove that the Qahal was not if he can't prove that the Qahal was racially monolithic, okay, then he can't make the limitation about race. It can't be about race that he calls Gentile believers today pretenders. It has to be about time constraints in the New Testament. So the question becomes, of what value then is Israel only? I mean, that's one of the things that I kind of realized along the way is, Israel only doesn't really nail down the constraints any more than they already are by what full preterism is constructed. It's the 80-70 seems to imply, the way it's being taught, that there's soteriological cessation, okay, on the globe. So therefore, this whole thing about race doesn't add anything. It's already limited, okay? So what I suspect is that maybe they're being a little irrational, thinking this somehow makes their case stronger. And I'm showing now it doesn't, it doesn't. And it produces confusion in the people that are trying to understand it and take it apart. So, you just have to drill down and do some clear thinking on this. Let's see. So race really has no bearing on who is a genuine believer and who is, in his estimation, is a wannabe. And I'm going to show that. So this is where we're going to pile on a lot of scriptures here. And we're running long, but it's important. I want to start in Hebrews 11, because this writer, who I believe is Barnabas, by the way, I've believed that for quite a while, and I think it's just a powerfully convincing identification of the author. But it spans the entire, the writer in chapter 11, he spans the entire history of the Bible, and this is the value of it, because he's going through all the eras of the biblical history, okay? And he's plucking out examples of faithful people who, no matter what era they lived in or what national context they were in and died in, they are accounted in the one fulfilled heavenly ultimate Qahal ecclesia church, which is called the New Jerusalem. All right, so let's quote, catch the power of that. Hebrews 11:13-16. These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers. As you're going to see, the examples in here span the whole history, including Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Israel, people that have the law. All of a sudden, they're the ones that are considered, and they're considering themselves. And he's saying that even at that time, they considered themselves strangers, foreigners, exiles. For people who speak thus, make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. Oh gosh, I thought the physical geography of Israel and Jerusalem was the homeland, the covenant homeland. Evidently not. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country. That is a heavenly one. So right here it's saying that it always has been a heavenly homeland. All right. Even the Israelites, that was not their homeland. Even when they were not in exile, that was not their homeland. See, the new covenant, when it came with its reality, has suddenly rendered everything in the past in the true light that they were actually just types. Okay, so, but as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. So we're going to take a look at these who all die in faith, and we're going to show the racial nature of God's Qahal in all ages. We're going to break it up into epochs, and most importantly, in the final one, the New Jerusalem. But get that, even Israelites relative to the New Jerusalem were themselves strangers. The old Qahal was but a type, not the real, but nonetheless there's value in looking at the type, because the type, again, is lesser than the real. So whatever the type has, it has to be exponentially more in the real. Now, keep a close eye on that word at the end. God is not ashamed to be called their God. Ooh, boy, what is that? That language, that's awfully familiar covenant language. Where have we seen that? Hosea, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Peter, and Paul. To be called their God is the strongest covenant language, in tandem with to be called my people. In Hosea 1:9, call his name Lo-Ami, for you are not my people, and I will not be your God. So that, what's going on in Hosea, by the way, is covenant reversal. It's disinheriting a group and getting them out of the covenant. They're no longer in the covenant, so they are not his people. He is not their God. In Hebrews, he's listing all these people spanning the entire narrative of the Bible, and God says, I am their covenant God. So we are going to look at the nature of the Qahal. Now let's look at some of the particulars, names named in Hebrews 11. Let's look at the membership of the Qahal, both in history and in the ultimate Qahal of the New Jerusalem, because that's really where they inherit. So all these people that are named are in the real, not the type, the real Qahal. So let's talk about, we have Abel. Abel was not an Israelite. And I know you have to be careful at this stage of the game using the word Israelite and Gentile, because really Gentile comes into play when it's juxtaposed against Israel, okay? So, but for our purposes here, I'm just going to use it, We have Abel, he was not an Israelite. We have Enoch, he was not an Israelite. We have Noah, he was not an Israelite. Then we have, let's call it the Abrahamic Qahal. This is where the Qahal becomes Abrahamic. From there on, the names listed will be those descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, except in verse 33, we have mention of Rahab, the harlot. Okay, who is Rahab? Was she an Israelite? Nope. She was a pagan harlot in Jericho who was redeemed and actually became an ancestor of Jesus Christ, just as did Ruth the Moabitess. Okay. So let's break up so right there, we could stop right there. No. In the type, God was reaching out and saving non-Israelites. How much more in the reality? Sorry, Jason. So anyway, let's break up the errors of the Qahal. Okay, let's create these categories to make this helpful. We have the Adamic Qahal. Okay, so this would be the era of Adam to Noah. Okay, then we have the Noahic Qahal. This would be the era of from Noah to Abraham. Then we have the Abrahamic Qahal, and that would be Abraham until the conquest, and now let's say from Abraham to Moses, okay? Then we have the Mosaic Qahal, and then we have the Israel Qahal, okay? Now, in all 5 of these Qahals that we're seeing spanning the entire epoch, all the epochs of the biblical narrative, and we know, again, based on Hebrews, they're all in the real Qahal. Were they pure Gentile? Were they pure Israelite, or were they a mixture? Just simple categories to classify them. So let's look at the Adamic Qahal. And again, we have to be careful of the word Gentile at this point. I'm just going to say non-Israelite, non-Abraham, okay? The Adamic Qahal, pure Gentile. They're in the pure Gentile section of the New Jerusalem, Jason. Okay, the Noachic Qahal, pure Gentile, Jason. They're also in the Gentile section of the New Jerusalem. Okay, then we get to the Abrahamic Qahal. Mixture. Why do I say mixture? Because Abraham himself wasn't descended from Abraham. He came from Ur of the Chaldees. And when he went to get wives, did he marry Abrahamic wives? No, he married foreign wives. He married, and I say foreign because they're foreign to Canaan, foreign to the land that God had promised. But they are part of Abraham's family. So the wives of all the patriarchs, they deliberately took them from Syria. I think that was the area. Also in Genesis, it talks about Abraham circumcising all of his household servants. Okay, these were not his descendants. All right, but covenant was circumcision was a covenant. If you look at the language, I don't have time right now, but if you go to Genesis, God presents circumcision to Abraham as my covenant with you. Okay, and so it was a mixture. Melchizedek was in the Abrahamic epoch, and he was a priest of the Most High God. He wasn't Abraham's descendant, bro. Mixture. All right, so let's go to the next one would be the Mosaic Qahal. Was that Gentile, mixture, or pure Israelite? Mixture. Tell you, Jason, it's just not working out too well. Your Qahal is not looking very Abrahamic. But we'll get to Abraham. We'll get there. But so far, you know, it's not there. I'm sorry. So we get to the Mosaic Qahal. And why do I say mixture? Because the scriptures go a long ways when they're talking about the Exodus, about a mixed multitude that comes out with Israel, and that mixed multitude inherits. And as you'll see, we'll read some verses where it says that they actually come into covenant at Sinai. Oh, isn't that cool? So we had a mixture. We know about Jethro. Okay, he was from the Mosaic era, and Jethro was not a descendant of Abraham. He may have been a remnant of the pre-Mosaic tradition of worship of Yahweh, that he knew Yahweh before any Israelite did. And if you look at the study, it's interesting because it appears that God was known prior to Moses meeting Jethro as El Shaddai, Elohim, you know, which was based on El, which was part of the Canaanite pantheon. Okay, it was a well-known name for God. And they may have even worshipped the exact El of the Canaanite pantheon. But at some point, that got united with the Yahweh traditions. And so all of a sudden, redactors would start talking about Yahweh Elohim. And then you see, you know, the redacting of the older stories, like in Genesis, has the word Yahweh in it, even though God later says that, you know, the patriarchs didn't know me as Yahweh. So that's how we know, by the way, that the Torah was redacted many centuries later. Okay, so now the Mosaic was a mixture, okay? Even Moses married a Midianite woman, okay? And he got flack for it too, and God smacked him. Smacked the ones who were offended by Moses marrying a non-Israelite woman. So then we come to what I say is, you know, post-Mosaic. This would be the Israel Qahal, and again, mixture. And I'll show, you know, how that's embedded in the law of Moses. Israel has always accepted converts. There's always been a mechanism for conversion for the foreigner who wants to worship Yahweh. There's even a story where someone comes from, I don't know the exact without looking at it, but someone comes to Elijah or Elisha, I may be mixing it up. He's from a different country. He's a pagan. And he's being sent to heal, to find healing, cleansing from leprosy, I believe. And God actually heals him through Elijah. And he becomes a worshiper of Yahweh, and he's just in gratitude. So what does he do? He takes back, he presents a vow that when he goes back, he's going to be worshiping Yahweh along with the other gods in the temple. But he also says he takes a box of dirt from the Holy Land and brings it back to him. Why did he do that? Because he knew in his mind that this land was in covenant with God. And he knew that he had to go back. It wasn't like he could move. So what he did was he brought some of the real estate back. That's an interesting side note there. So anyway, this will show and expose the error of DeCosta's claim of the statement, the law was given only to Israel. Well, yes, it was only given to the Qahal of Israel, but the Qahal was ethnically diverse and always accepted and reached out to and blessed, healed, saved, okay, brought into the fullness of the covenant. Always, always, always. So, that shows that DeCosta's tact, his approach is that Israel should be interpreted along racially exclusionary lines, suggesting that the law and covenant was only for an ethnically monolithic and pure people, as if to exclude others categorically. It's just plain wrong. It's just plain wrong. But you got to get into the details to see that. So yes, the law and the covenant was made with only one Qahal, but the Qahal was an assembly of Abrahamic and non-Abrahamic in terms of DNA peoples, always have, always will be. So one needs to correct and qualify DeCosta's statement. And I'm not saying that this is literally a quote from him, but this is sort of a representative statement. To say that the law and the covenant was given only to one Qahal, which is a multi-ethnic assembly comprised of people from many nations that always accepted converts. All right, so let's get into some scriptures here. It's running late. So first, we're going to hit Exodus 12, 17 through 19. And so what I want to do the rest of the time is just flesh out that is the case. Okay, 12, 17. All right. So you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this same day I will have brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting ordinance. In the first month, in the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. For 7 days no leaven shall be found in your houses, since whoever eats what is leavened, that same person shall be cut off from the congregation, Qahal of Israel, whether he is a stranger or a native of the land. You shall eat nothing leavened in all your dwellings. You shall eat unleavened bread. Okay? So here we have the law applying to strangers. All right? They're participating in the covenant life. All right, let's go to Exodus 12, 47 through 49. 47 through 49. All the congregation, Qahal of Israel, shall keep it. And when a stranger dwells with you and wants to keep the Passover, are you kidding me? Jason, if God was excluding non-Israelite people, I mean, look at the New Jerusalem where it says, nothing unclean and holy shall ever enter into its gates. There was always, look at how the Second Temple had the middle wall of partition, and Gentiles couldn't come in upon pain of death. I mean, why would Yahweh allow those that he racially excludes into his covenant life and worship? All right. So, when a stranger dwells with you and wants to keep the Passover to the Lamb, what is the meaning of Passover, by the way? Why would you keep some? Is it just a meaningless symbol? No, it's being redeemed by the blood of the Lamb from your sins. Okay. Let all his males be circumcised. Remember, circumcision from the earliest days in Genesis was a covenant. And then let him come near. Come near. Covenant language. Him who is near, him who is afar. You have come near. And keep it. And he shall be as a native in the land. Okay? For no, it's not that no foreigner shall eat of it. It's no uncircumcised. No one who is not observing the covenant stipulations of the Qahal. One law shall be for the native born and for the stranger who lives among you. Okay? You know what's interesting is we're going through all these scriptures, and you're not going to see anything much more radical than that, where the Torah says one law for both the native born and the stranger. Nothing is said in the Torah about going beyond that to where a stranger would actually have a tribal inheritance. All right? I'm going to show a verse, hopefully I can get back to it. Isaiah 49, where it says, Ezekiel 49, where Ezekiel is describing the end time eschatological temple, which we know that John fleshes out as the New Jerusalem. Ezekiel includes in there that the foreigner that dwells in your midst shall receive his inheritance in the tribe that he lives in. All right, so let's go to Deuteronomy 31. Remember how I said the reality is always greater than the type. Deuteronomy 31, 10 through 13. Jason Boy is on the ropes. So Deuteronomy 31, 10 through 13. And Moses commanded them, saying, at the end of every 7 years, at the appointed time in the year of the release, at the Feast of Tabernacles, when all Israel appears to come before the Lord your God, in the place which he chooses, you shall read this law before all Israel in their hearing. Gather the people together, men and women and little ones, and the stranger who is within your gates, that they may hear, and that they may learn to fear the Lord your God and carefully observe all the words of this law. The law is going to foreigners. Leviticus 16. Leviticus 16. Leviticus 16, 23 through 31. Told you we were going to go through a lot of scripture here. Then Aaron shall come into my tabernacle of meeting, shall take off the linen garments which he put on when he went into the holy place, and shall leave them there. And he shall wash his body with water in the holy place, put on his garments, come out and offer his burnt offering. And